All right, welcome. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Annie, for inviting me. And I want to back up some of what you're going to see that a lot of what I talk about is actually going to interface with what Joellen talked about as well, about professional development and other skills. And I see people are coming online, and that's really helpful to me because I'm going to run this as a workshop. So I'll introduce myself, but then set three goals that we're going to do and we're going to get the first one of them done really quickly. So as Annie mentioned, I've been teaching writing to scientists or writing with scientists for a very long time. My background's actually in molecular biology. I was an undergraduate at Harvard where I worked and published in a laboratory of the first woman to be tenured in the biochemistry department, coming through the department, Nancy Kleckner. And then I went to graduate school at MIT, and one of my classmates won the Nobel Prize. And so that was the life that I thought I was going into, that I was going to be a research scientist, and had phenomenal mentors, as you can well imagine. You know, I had great peers, I had great colleagues, I had great mentors. And I made a switch in part because what I noticed, and this is a moment of flagging something that you might want to notice, is that although I had all this great advice around me and people around me. And I learned a ton about what's a productive line of inquiry, what's a good experiment, what's a control, when are you done, when do you have to go do something else. When it came time to write, nobody seemed to have very much to say. And what they had to say, it wasn't very helpful. And actually, I realized I'm merged two different introductions here perfectly, because I'm going to share a screen for a moment and just give you a version of that. So I have slides, and there will be a handout which I will drop into the chat a little later. But for the moment, I'm just going to share my screen and give you a couple of what it looks like. Let's start from the beginning. Here we go. Yay. Okay, so opening slide. So this is the program I'm part of at Princeton, and this is the actual program that I run, which is working with graduate students and postdocs in quantitative fields. But I got there, as I said, from this experience of being a graduate student that's a little bit like this email here, where this happens to me all the time. I get an email from a department that says one of our faculty members came in and complained that juniors didn't know how to write a junior paper. So, and could you maybe do something about that? They meet every week for 90 minutes, but you don't have to use all of that. Okay, so this was experience in graduate school as well. It was time to write. And what was the instruction? Well, you know how to do this, don't you? And of course, I said, oh, sure, yeah, all right, I'm going to go off and do it. You know, like don't know how to write a junior paper. Yeah, okay, I'll go do that. And it won't take me very long, will it? You know, and so I'm going to go off and do this. Oh my goodness, you must be kidding. All right, so I'm going to stop the slide for a moment to talk to all of you. So this is the first moment of effective change. So we have this notion that writing is something that everybody should know how to do. And my answer to that email, a version of it was, well, you know, your juniors don't know how to write a junior paper because they haven't ever done one. And once they've done one, we'll have a new name for them. We'll call them seniors. So and so, yeah, I'm seeing that reaction. So there's a moment of cognitive dissonance here. This thing is coming down of like, you should know how to do this. And we stand there saying, oh my goodness, I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to fake that I do because somehow I'm supposed to know how to do it. And my exclamation points are, why would you expect to know how to do this? You've never done it before. Why would anybody expect you to know how to do it? You've never done it before. Okay. My response also went on and said, yes, I know they took a writing seminar. And so everybody thinks, well, okay, they know about writing, but in the writing seminar, we taught them to use power tools and to build a prefab birdhouse. Expecting them to write a new document like a junior paper or a thesis or a research article, or as Annie mentioned, a review article, is a little bit like saying, well, you know how to use power tools and you've lived in houses your entire life, so you'll go build one next week. So that moment, and so the first point I want to make is that we have a lot of expectations, particularly around scientific writing, that are really sort of striking and startling, that somehow we're supposed to know how to do this without any experience and without a whole lot of practice. Okay, so that's issue number one. And the term I use for this is that we tend to, what we assume in science is that people can do things with they are proficient without practice. And that's a little bit crazy. And that's the first point. So the first turn I want you to make is, as you're in graduate school, when you hit these moments where somebody asks you to do something and there's the momentary panic of like, I don't think I know how to do that, but I'm supposed to. What got me through graduate school was a visiting professor whose great line was, ignorance was innocent. And what she would explain was, she would sort of interrogate herself and say, is there any reason why I should know how to do this? Like, have I ever done it before? Has anybody ever instructed me? Do I actually automatically know how? And she said, if the answer was, I don't know, for purely innocent reasons, she would show up and start asking questions. It was amazing. She used to ask questions in the middle of a group meeting, and the rest of us would go like, she asked my question, but I was afraid to. So this is moment number one. One of my points is that writing is challenging. You come equipped because you know how to use language, with being able to do some things, but to expect yourself to be able to write your first research article just because you've read research articles, we're going to work with that space a little bit, but not accurate. Okay, so I was in this situation in graduate school, and I went to write, and I noticed something, and this is the second move that I noticed. Although my data did not change, my results did. Have you had that experience? That you think you've collected data and you think you know what it is, or you've got a version, you've got a story, you've got a set of claims about what it is. But when you go and present it to somebody else, or you write about it, or you engage with putting it in language, although the data remain the same, the results change. Now, that was another one of those suppress, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be just writing up my results. How are they changing? And so this is another moment of cognitive dissonance, of a cognitive dissonance as a mismatch between what I think is going on and what the data tell me is going on. Okay, the data says my results are changing, but the ideology is, oh, that's not supposed to happen, so I'm going to pretend it isn't. I actually didn't pretend it wasn't. I actually mocked into that pretty clearly and said, gee, that's really interesting, and that's sort of weird. If my results are changing as I write, then when I write, I am doing science. In fact, I'm doing a significant piece of the science. I'm doing the piece of science that takes it out of my private knowledge and moves it into public knowledge. And isn't it really interesting that nobody around here seems to have much helpful to say about that? That's weird. Who taught? Somebody must have noticed this, even if nobody at MIT is talking about it right now. This is no longer true at MIT, by the way. I know the director of writing at MIT. So this is not true at the time. But back when I was in graduate school, it still was. Nobody was talking about this. And I thought, somebody must be talking about it. Where is that? And that's how I ended up in writing studies, because that actually was where people were talking about it. But a lot of the language they're talking about it is coming from the humanities. And we haven't had ways to bridge between the two of them. So that's one of the goals here. I'm going to give you some language where what I'm hoping to do is capture what you already know and might have noticed, but without a framework for thinking about it and using it, swept it under the rug, pushed it aside, and potentially pushed it aside with a sense of inadequacy, with a sense of like, oh God, I'm supposed to know how to do this, and it isn't, I'm not having a good time doing it, because that becomes a problem as well. And so I'm going to try to give you some language for doing this kind of work. I want to frame it by saying that this is actually pedagogy, i.e. it's the transmission of teaching somebody else how to do something. And I'm going to ask you to think about that end of it too, because the thing that separates scientists from other writers in other professions and in the academy is not any of the things that we tend to think separate us from everybody else. For instance, it's not that we write about numbers. So do the economists, okay? You know, that, and it's not that we use images or pictures or figures in, you know, that we ask people to read an image. So do the art historians. And what I've learned being in writing programs working across the university, and Annie didn't mention, including at Penn in the late 90s. So I have a very fond spot for Penn. I was teaching the engineering school at Penn at the time. What happens in our history is people write about images all the time, and they give them a vocabulary for talking about images and about tone and about line, like how to actually put into words what you notice about an image. It'd be so much easier to talk about the impact of figures if we had that vocabulary. So that's not what separates us. What really separates scientists and engineers from other writers is that we write collaboratively. We write on teams. And I learned that first in engineering, actually, because engineering got the notion of teamwork sooner than the formal sciences. That papers are typically written on teams. And this is what professionals do. I mean, I have an ongoing contract with the Environmental Protection Agency, where the document that brought me in there a decade ago was something called the Integrated Science Assessment for Particulate Matter. And it was 2,228 pages long with 65 authors who had to produce a corporate document. And as you can imagine, it was a little crazy. So what scientists do is they write collaboratively. And that means that for the rest of your career in industry, in academia, in business, in the government, wherever you are, if you're doing science and engineering, you're going to be writing on a team. And what that means is that unless your colleagues give you what you need without you giving them any instruction or feedback, you're essentially in the situation that people in my writing program are in, where they're trying to teach writing. So my courses are taught by postdocs in science and engineering, because they can see that, oh my goodness, if I can figure out as a postdoc how to talk about writing, when I have my own lab, it's going to go way smoother. So this is my little moment. We're also going to do a little bit of pedagogy here. There is a pedagogy for teaching writing in science, because nobody is born knowing how to write a scientific research article, and people who survive in the field have managed to learn to do so. So the pedagogy that's in place is the stochastic method, the random walk. Go and write something. No, not that. Write something else. No, not that. Don't you know how to write the? So if this is sounding at all familiar, this is what I want to undo a little bit. I want to give you some. So I'm giving you an effective turn. The next time you bump into this moment of like, wait a minute, somebody expects me to do something and there's no way I should know how to do it. Hello, stop. Let's get instruction. A philosophical turn. I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to do some really practical stuff. So this is the framing, and we're going to do hands-on stuff, and that's why there's going to be a handout. And I'm going to actually teach. I'm going to take that theory into the concrete, and I'm going to give you a set of analytic tools that are appropriate for revision that you can use immediately. And then I'm going to back up what Annie says: if you want to be writing review articles or papers or whatever you can, as soon as you can, because there's a proficiency problem. Okay, so I'm going to think about my slides where I want to be here with this. Let me do the proficiency problem, because that happens to be the next slide. So I'm going to give it to you. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the kind of work that we're going to do today. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slides. All right, so this is my explanation of like, and why do you think I should know this? We tend to assume proficiency without practice. Okay, so I want to introduce you to the crab, or actually crustaceans, because this is the image, this and a lobster are the images that I use for postdocs in science and engineering. By the time one is a postdoc, this is you. Now, what do I mean by that? So a little bit of biology. I was trained as a biologist. Okay, a little biology. So these crabs, I think they're Maryland crabs, but these crabs are born, the nymph crabs, the small ones, are born with two small claws. It's absolutely true for the New England lobster, two small claws. But the adults have one giant oversized claw and one small claw. And I love this image because it suggests that it's actually ambidextrous. It doesn't, it turns out that it's happenstance. It's which claw gets used more. So the neurobiologists have been studying this. And what's similar between crabs and you is that the crab starts to do something, use a claw, and the region of the brain that is innervated and connected to the motor neurons, et cetera, starts to grow. So crabs have plastic brains just like us. And as they do things, synapses are connected and you can see the growth in the brain. Lovely. Crabs differ from us that when the brain grows, it sends instructions to the claw, to the appendage, to grow the appendage. So now we have a feedback loop that this claw gets bigger. The more bigger it is, the more things I want to do with it, the more things I do with it, the more the brain circles back, grows bigger, more instruction, and boom, we are asymmetric. Okay, why is this you? Because in a standard scientific education, even an excellent one like I had, by the time you finish graduate school, somebody gives you an experiment to do or an inquiry to go like claw. Oh, I'm super good at that. No problem. But writing often feels like you all of a sudden trying to do something with that little claw. And I like this metaphor because it brings home that this only gets worse the longer you go. So at the beginning of your graduate career, these two claws are more or less balanced with each other, a little bit more in balance. But the longer one pursues one and not the other, the more awkward and difficult it feels to be trying to do things with this other claw. So I want to give you some strategies that are about right now, at this point in your careers, being able to take on writing and thinking about writing in more productive ways. And this is Don Botham, who's noted as a writer, but just as a quote about a writer when embarking on a task does not know what to do. So there's also a sort of dwelling in the, oh, when I'm writing, it's not as simple as writing it all up, but it's rather, I don't know what this thing is until I've actually communicated it to someone else. So the agenda for today, I'm going to give you an alternative framing. I'm going to introduce some principles, and I'm going to talk about revision from that perspective. All right, so let me go back to being able to look at all of you. Okay, so you heard half my story. Half my story is like I'm in graduate school thinking, I don't know what to do with this. And how come everybody thinks I can write? And what am I going to do next? And then I get really lucky. I land at Duke University where I encounter a framework that nobody had ever given me, and I'm going to give to you, which is to think about writing, not from the writer's perspective. What am I supposed to do? And why do you think I know how to do this? But from the reader's perspective. And this actually comes out of literary studies and theory and philosophy. It's the notion that language is actually created by the people who listen to it. The speaker may have intentions, but what a document means, what a phrase means, what a mark on the page means, depends upon the recipient. The recipients interpret and make meaning. Okay, it's already a gift, because I'm going to predict that everybody in this room is a way more experienced reader than you are a writer of scientific documents. Fair? Yeah, some of you are nodding. Good. Thank you. That makes me feel like I'm not just talking to names. Good. And again, talk about postdocs. Like, again, by the end of your graduate career, the ratio of papers you will have read to papers you have written will probably top 10 to the third. And that ratio will stay pretty constant for the rest of your life. Okay, so we have huge databases in each of us of what is a scientific article and what does it mean to read it. Now, the reading perspective changes over the course of graduate school. I could define graduate school as the experiences necessary to become a professional reader of the literature, to develop critical insight, to understand when somebody is faking it. I mean, you have to have experiments fail and succeed in order to recognize the contingency of observation. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in graduate school that produces professional readers, but by the time you graduate, you will know a ton about what it is to read as a critical academic rigorous researcher, the professional research literature. The trick is that nobody up until about 30 years ago had a language for connecting what we know intuitively or inchoately as readers and turning it into guidance for writers. So it's like we've got two different parts in us. We've got the part that comes online to write, which is a little mysterious because it has things to say, but we've got this part that knows how to read and they don't talk to each other. So this was really exciting. I landed at Duke University and I got this language, this methodology, this approach for thinking about writing from a reader's perspective, i.e. how to activate what you already know. So that's the framework. And so if you already don't overlook the moments where you realize you don't know what's going on and you need to ask questions, that's already a good takeaway for today. The second one is if you can start to think like readers, that'll change your life right there too. And what we're going to do for the rest of the afternoon or the rest of our time together is actually put that into concrete practice. What do I mean by thinking like a reader? Can we give you some vocabulary? Let me show you something that you know as a reader that you probably don't consciously know as a writer. I absolutely did not. It's the problem. We're going to deal with a particular challenge in writing that affects probably 75% of the sentences written in professional prose. And if we can get a handle on it, it like takes care of a whole lot of things. So that's why it's the one thing I want to try to hand over. So we're going to think like readers. Okay. Ready? You're experienced readers. You've read a lot of papers. Cool. Let me make some claims about your experience as readers then, and you can agree or not. And actually you can thumbs up or thumbs down. Reading takes energy. Yes, no. Yeah. Okay. And the amount of energy and the kind of energy and the quality of energy you summon has to do with the reading task. Like more energy for longer reading, more energy for a review article than for USA Today, more energy for an abstract than for Twitter. All right, so notice that, okay, so reader, we have energy, and notice that our sense of that energy is sort of assigned to the task in front of us. So it's an input output ratio, right? So the environment offers us something and we look at it from our experience and say, oh, this needs this much energy, this much. Okay, so we have, let me make it more concrete. We have paragraph energy, which is more energy than sentence energy. And that's more energy than Twitter energy, for instance. Okay, so we had different sizes of energy, and we summon that energy, as it were, based on our experience and our expectations about what's coming at us. So we have some experience with all these different forms of language, and we say, oh, this is what I need. Okay, what do we do with that energy? Well, what I offered you before is that what readers do is they interpret. They look at the words on the page. They take what they understand about the situation. Oh, it's Twitter. Oh, it's probably going to be clever. And then they use those expectations and they interpret what comes at them. Okay, so what do I mean by interpret? We're going to unpack the notion of interpretation a lot this afternoon. When they interpret, I'm going to break interpretation into two steps. First, interpretation is the part I've been talking about, which is about structure. What is this? Is it an abstract? Is it a title? Is it a headline? Is it Twitter? Is it the fifth paragraph in the third section of a 200-page document? Okay, different expectations depending on what is this thing. Is it a sentence? Is it a title? Okay, structure. I'm going to name that structure. We first make assessments of what is it. And only after we make assessments of what is it do we go to what does it say? What's the substance? What is it? What is that? What is in this title? What is in this tweet? What is happening to me? Okay, structure, substance. I'm seeing nods. All right, so that's making sense too. So I'm going to put those two together. We summon a certain amount of energy. I actually want to make it metaphorical. I want to talk about a breath. So a kind of reader's breath to do some work. Okay, so we summon reader energy for the task of interpretation, where interpretation has these two layers: first structure, then substance, which makes interpretation a zero-sum game. If I have a finite amount of energy available right now, working cognitive memory, as the psychologists call it, finite amount of energy available right now for these two tasks of structure and substance, then, and they go in this order, then we can have a working definition of bad scientific writing. Bad scientific writing, at least first approximation, is writing that requires a disproportionate amount of the reader's energy simply to figure out what it is and how to put it together. And you're nodding. That's about 50% of the literature, right? And we get better at it with more experience of sort of recognizing, oh, it's this kind of train wreck as opposed to that kind of train wreck. And we get a little better at working with it. So I was like, wow, I can live with that definition. There's nothing hypothetical about it, right? Disproportionate amount of energy simply to figure out how it's all put together. Because if you're spending all of your energy trying to figure out how these words make a sentence, or these sentences make a paragraph, or this experiment makes a result, then we have no ability to think about what is trying to tell us. What is trying to tell us. So that's going to give us a working frame for thinking about how can we think about this relationship between structure and substance. Let me give you a couple, I'm watching the time. Yeah, okay, I'm going to give you one or two examples on structure and substance just to trigger this before we dive into the handout. Okay. I'll just give one. I know this one. This will work. So I bet you've had this experience. You're reading, let's say, a review article, and you start a paragraph on the right-hand page. Oh, about a third the way down the right-hand page. Okay. So you got maybe 16, 20 lines of text on the page. Read. And as you turn the page, your eye scans, whether you're conscious of it or not, the left-hand margin, and you notice that there's no paragraph break anywhere on this page. How do you feel? Yeah. Oh, the heart sinks. Yep. So you've had this experience. Good. So this is reader experience. I'm telling you that this experience is, rather than a moment of heartache, there's a ton of information in it. So that's part of what we're going to unpack. The heart sinks. Oh my God. Now, what do people do? So I've investigated. I can tell you what people do. They do one of three things. Some people speed up, turn to the left-hand page, notice there's no paragraph break, and start reading really quickly and skimming the left-hand page. Okay, some of you are nodding. That's what some people do, or some of the time. Sometimes what people do is the heart sinks, and they turn back to the previous page, and they start the paragraph over. Yeah, some of you do, and they read that, and then somehow, as if they need a running start to get through this thing. And so they got to go back and begin it all over again and get into the jump. All right. And what everybody does, whether they're aware of it or not, is take a quick glance over at the upcoming right-hand page, just to make sure there is a paragraph break over there, because God forbid this should happen to you at the top of the next page too, then you'll just give up. All right, cool. So notice so this is one of the great moments about Zoom. If we were in the room, we would be doing it there too. You notice everybody, all these people who are not, you are not weird. I'm pulling out the weird private experience of reading, and and notice that everybody is nodding. So you're not weird. There's information in this. What's the information? So now some framing around it. Key terms. We as readers have expectations. And we have expectations about paragraphs. So actually, I'm going to back up for a minute. Let's just dwell on how weird this is. Like, why all these behaviors? And particularly why the sense of despondency? Oh no. Because you knew you were going to read every word on this left-hand page. When you sat down to do this reading, you committed to that. And in fact, if you're me, not only did I know that I was going to read every word on the left-hand page, but I knew I was going to read every word on the next 13 and 1/3 pages after this, because if it's a heavy duty reading, I mean, I can't even read a novel without knowing how many pages it is. And I have to keep from looking at the end. So you committed to doing this. You know exactly how long it is. You know you're going to read every word on this page. Why the sense of, oh, and I had jumped ahead with is the misfit is not between the structure of the document, but the structure of a paragraph. We have expectations for paragraphs. And it is the mismatch between our expectations and therefore our map for reading this paragraph and the actual paragraph in front of us. Okay, so quick, and this is actually one we can use the chat for. How long do you think a paragraph is? And this is, so we're thinking like readers. One of the things that makes thinking like a reader hard is that we read alone. And after about 8th grade, you don't talk about your reading experience much with other people. And so we never get a chance to check whether I'm reading as an idiosyncratic reader, which we love you, idiosyncratic readers. That's why we have reviewers, because you want those readers. Or am I reading like most other people? And we like them too. Like, it's good to, you need to write to the community, but you also want, all right. So how many sentences do you expect a paragraph to be? Would you drop it in the chat? Because what I'm looking for actually is, let's discover the range of expectations around a paragraph in a scientific document. How many sentences in a paragraph? 5, 15, 10, 10, 15, 8 to 10, 8, 3 to 8, 5 to 7. Okay, 15. Cool. Yeah. All right. So what I'm seeing is we could tolerate 15. A lot, 5 feels a little small. Like 5 is, how many of you were taught the 5-sentence paragraph? At a very early, notice how it's sticking around. There's very little in your life now that you want to do the way you did when you were 10. This is also one of those things to let go of. I mean, this is part of what's so fun about working with language, because language comes online at about 20 months. And therefore our processing is we're all different ages when we write and think in words. Okay, but what I'm seeing is a cluster somewhere between 5 and 10. Hardworking professional paragraphs with some longer ones. All right, so 5 to 10, like how long is the paragraph going to be? Maybe, all right, it's a tough document, 5 to 10 sentences, maybe 10 to 12 if it's a tough paragraph. I've got enough energy, a mental breath to read a paragraph of that size. And I start allocating it on the right-hand page. 16 lines, let's say 2 lines per sentence. We're up to 8 sentences already. Hey, this is clearly one of the 8 to 10 or longer paragraphs. It's not a 5. I can see that already before I even started. Read. What am I doing? I've got the issue. I'm in the discussion. I'm starting to get ready for close. All this paragraph has to do, as far as I'm concerned, on the next page is close. And I'm allocating my energy, and you're allocating your energy in reading, reserving that much energy to wrap up the paragraph on the next page. Okay, that much energy, turn the page. That much energy confronts that much paragraph, and the heart sinks. And all of you, and now we get everybody's strategies. The people who speed up. Oh my goodness, I have this much energy. I have this much paragraph. Maybe if I run really fast, I can get to the paragraph break before I asphyxiate. I have this much paragraph. I have this much energy. Not going to work. Go back and reread everything we've read, because somehow, now that we know more about the structure, we're going to interpret it differently. Cool. So that is the core of the workshop. We're going to break it in. It's actually, if we want to do the whole thing, it would be 3 days. And that's what I do with the EPA, is 3-day work, 3-day course on this. But we're going to do just one little element of breaking it down into a specific place. But this notion that, and this is the great insight, it's the work of Joseph Williams, who was at the University of Chicago, and his colleagues, after the Second World War, comes out of cognitive psychology and linguistics. Readers have relatively fixed expectations about where in the structure of language they will find certain elements of substance. So they're capturing what we just noticed, that, gee, I read differently depending upon what I understand about the structure. What Joe realized is, yeah, that's how language works. Language puts words in structures, and the structures send instructions. You hear the roots carrying through? Instructions about what to do with those words so that we can make meaning out of them. Now, this turns out to be an easy sell to scientists more than anybody else. People who hate this are freshmen. Like, no. But scientists find this really easy because scientists and engineers have the most highly structured professional document there is, the research article. We know this, but so much so that we never even know how to talk about it, that we read things differently depending on what section we're in. You could take the same sentence and move it around and it would mean different things in different places. For instance, have you ever been reading in the results section and bumped into a ton of experimental detail? And you start thinking, don't they know this doesn't belong? Okay, so, right. So, yeah, like it's in the wrong place. And now you start doubting them. Or let me give you a different one. You're cruising along in the results section and you read something that you realize is a little more speculative than it should be. Like, this is what you would consider an interpretive claim as opposed to a result. Notice that a result is an interpretation of data, but an interpretation of a result is this other thing. And do you notice that you start getting super suspicious? Oh, they're trying to put something over on me. What else are they doing here? So that sense that we read and interpret based on the instructions we get from the structure. Cool. So what Joe recognized is that we do that even at the level of parts of sentences. I mean, we're going to work with sentences, but even at the level of within a sentence, we take instructions about what to do with these words from the syntactic structure sentences and from all sorts of other things. So I'm going to go back to the slideshow for a moment just to give it to you, and that will also give me a moment to start dropping links in the chat, because the problem with the slideshow is that once it's up, I can't see the rest of the screen. So let me do that for a minute, and then I'll go back to the rest of my screen. All right, so key terms that we've put into place already. So if we're thinking about writing from a reader's perspective, readers bring expectations to all their reading experience based on structure and substance and the relationship between them. And overguiding all of this is that context controls meaning. And that's what we just explored. If the context is, this is the results section, I absolutely do want to read the methods, but I don't want to read them here. Why? So the context, that's what we mean by context. It's the reader's experience what the reader brings to the moment of reading and their understanding the situation and what the structure instructs us. So what Joe figured out is that readers have discrete expectations about where in the structure of prose they will find particular kinds of information, including in a list, the action in the sentence, the agent for that action, whose story the sentence is telling, the linkage between this sentence and previous sentences, important information worthy of emphasis, the issue to be discussed, the point of the discussion, and the point of the entire paper. Okay, so that's why it takes 3 days. We know all of this intuitively as readers. What we're going to focus on is this middle stuff, chiastic structure. The linkage between this sentence and a previous sentence and important information worthy of emphasis. Okay, so let me get out of the slideshow for a moment and get out of this. Okay, now I need to give you some links. Have to be very methodical with Google because otherwise it won't do this. Yes. Okay. Now, the next question, I'm going to try to drop it if I can find it quickly. I'm going to see if I can find the folder. Oh, shoot. It's going to do that to me. What a pain in the neck. Nope. Nope. We're not going to do that. We're going to do it this way from my computer. Ah, good. There it is. I'm about to share it there as well. Cool. All right. So now the handout's in the chat. Great. Okay. So we're going to think about sentences. And we're going to think about sentences because we compose at the level of sentences. So it's really a moment where readers and writers intersect with each other. I think we make meaning at a larger unit, more at the level of paragraphs. But when we're writing, we're really working at the level of sentences and thinking about, okay, I've written a sentence. What's the next sentence to write and the next sentence to write? So that's writer perspective. I've said X. What can I say next? What can I say next? What I'm going to ask you to do and what we're going to explore is how readers read. And the reason I'm focusing on this moment is it's the most exciting moment in all of these materials in some ways, because it tries to make explicit what is absolutely implicit. From a reader's perspective, the most important moment in a passage is communicated in the space between the period of one sentence and the capital letter of the next. That gap where there is nothing there. When we because we're constantly making this transition from here's a thought, here's a thought, here's a thought, here's a thought. And we talk in science, people talk, well, I want it to be logical, which basically means I want to be able to move as a reader in a way that makes sense to me through these thoughts as they're presented by the writer. Now, writers tend to worry about flow. And I don't know exactly what flow means, but I think it actually has to do with this stuff. So that's the place we're going to go. How is it that readers navigate between the period and the capital letter? You've all had the experience, I'm sure, of you're reading a sentence and you read the next, and in fact, you start reading the next sentence and you realize you have fallen out of the document. You have no idea how you're getting from sentence 1 to sentence 2. That chasm is a cliff that you have gone off of. And and I don't know how to get back in it. And other documents where you don't even notice that there was any space at all. So how is it that readers navigate between thoughts one to the other? Okay. If you can control that, that's 70% of the game right there, right? If you can take your readers through your stream of consciousness, logical train of thought, and have them stay with you, then I call it the mind melt. Then it's the moment as a reader, you'll notice you start to relax, like, oh, I'm not gonna have to kill myself to do this. I can actually just read. And as a writer, you start to say, oh, good, you're with me. Let's go do something fun. Great. Okay. So to do this work, I'm going to ask you to imagine an experiment with me. Okay. Really simple-minded experiment. Let's assume that I have a container with I'd make it a beaker if I probably should bring a beaker next time. A beaker, and I have a thermometer that I can stick in the beaker, and I have a source of heat, which pretend my microphone is that. All right, so this is an imagination moment. So I'm going to apply heat to a liquid with a stopwatch and measure the temperature as a function of time. Okay, I did that. I am ready to publish. I have a lot of different ways to publish this. Yeah. Okay. So if you can open the handout, or I'm going to go put up some slides as well, which are the first parts of the handout as well. But what we can do is, and I got to go back to slideshow. Yeah. And now you're back on my screen. Okay, so I have a lot of ways I could present this. For instance, I could present my data as in Form A. At little t, well, that's time, 15 minutes. That's the end of the experiment. The temperature was 32 degrees, but at the beginning, it was 25 degrees. 6 minutes in, it was 29 degrees. 3 minutes before that, it was 27. At 12 minutes, it was 32. And at 9 minutes, it was 31. So those are my data. They are complete. And those of you who've had to mentor, visiting students who are checking out a life in science, if one of them hands you data in this form, I can imagine sort of, I put my arm around them saying, not sure you're cut out for this. Okay, so I can take exactly the same information and I can put it in a different structure, much more familiar in B, right? Exactly the same words, same letters, but B means something to us. And in fact, notice, and this is another version of this insight, that structure affects interpretation. The interpretation of A is you should find another career. The interpretation of B is, oh my goodness, what's going on in this experiment? Data remain the same. Interpretation has changed. This is not complete, right? I could actually go and plot it, and I get a plot that looks like that, where I've got this linear thing, but then it starts to not be, something happened. What's going on at 9 minutes in that things, that's a little weird. Okay, question for all of you. And I'm going to bring you back where I can see you, if I can do that. Yeah. So how come we can read this structure? Like, how do we read this structure in B? What do you notice there? How come we get something out of this table? Part of what I'm trying to do is surface the visual cues of a table. So how do you know how to read it? Somebody come on. Yeah. Information is aligned. It's what's chronological? I'm going even below that. What's chronological? There's a column. So I'm going to structure. There's a structure of a column. There's a vertical arrangement of numbers where we look at it and we implicitly say, oh, somebody deliberately gave me a column, which means there must be something, there's a link, there's a rule that unites all these things in the column. And guess what? They increase and it says T time. Oh, that's a chronology. Okay, so the big thing on this table is a vertical and horizontal arrangement. And the ability to manipulate that, billion-dollar market in the 80s when that showed up. It was like, oh my goodness, we can actually create software to do that without people copying it. Oh, we would not be in the data world we're in without it. So there's the second arrange. So that's the columns. What's my rule? Oh, we're in order. It's a time chronology. And there's another column that's temperature. Okay. What's the other implicit instruction? The rows. Read across. Here are two values and they're in a relationship. What's the rule? Oh, one variable, other variable. They're related to. This must be the temperature at this time point. Got it. And now we can read it and we can plot it. Okay. So those are all the embedded cues of the structure that we just take for granted until, and this is actually the advantages of teaching every once in a while, that until you encounter somebody who doesn't know those rules, and that's when you realize, oh, actually there are rules, I need to explain them to somebody because they don't actually know how to write the junior paper or the table. Okay, now there's another cue embedded in there though, that's the one that we're going to pay attention to, that's a little harder to see, because until it's violated, until we encounter it in a new form. So I'd like you to compare B to C. They're both tables. They have the same data. Would you not agree that B is easier to read than C? Yeah, this is where I'm going to move you back where I can see you. Yeah. Okay. Why? We're going to surface, it's visually pleasing. Yeah, we're going to surface something. So you're going to actually surface a piece of cognition that's so deeply buried, we don't even know that it's there. If I wanted to plot, see, I could do that. I would get a different plot. And in fact, C seems to make the remarkable claim that if you want time to pass, you should raise the temperature. And then you think, no, 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 it doesn't say that. And so you have to do something. So why is C so hard to read? Causal relationship, X versus Y. Yeah, getting close. That's absolutely right. Let's get some more language around that. Our training lets us know which is X and which is Y. Beautiful, beautiful. Let me bring this back. Okay. So how many of you are taught that you want the X is the independent variable? Or it's often referred to as the given variable, and the Y is the dependent variable, the acquired or measured variable. Actually, when I was at Penn, I taught in the chemical engineering department on their project lab course. And I can tell you, this is like, you may have all forgotten, but undergraduates invert these variables all the time. Because I can tell, because and all the tables, the first rounds of tables are the variables are inverted, and it makes professors crazy. And I had to like, so why do we want the independent variable before the dependent variable? Do you notice that we do? That when you look at C, what you have to do is read from right to left. Because if you read from left to right, you get temperature as a function of time as a function of temperature, in which case, if we just raise the temperature, it'll go faster and then it won't. Okay, so you got to read from right to left, and that's a burden. Why do we have to read from right to left? Why do we need the independent variable before the dependent variable? And it's the way our minds work. The independent variable is context. It is the structure of the given, of the known. And it is the dependent variable that is novelty, is the reason for producing this experiment. The known is time passes. The unknown is what happens to temperature. But I can only interpret what happens to temperature if I have the independent variable. So what I'd like you to do, I'm not sure, I can't see if we were in person, I would be doing this with my hand. So take a look at table C and cover the right-hand column. What you've got is the temperatures, right? What do they mean? Oh no, got a bunch of observations. They're increasing and then they're not. And for all we know, the time intervals are as uneven as the temperature values are changing, i.e. there's nothing exceptional to notice here. It is only the regularity of the time points that makes the irregularity of the temperature points visible. Okay, so this is where we do cognitive psychology. The way we take in new information, novelty, is by being able to compare it to something we already know. And then we can interpret it. And the order that information needs to come in is familiar, new, stable, different, given, acquired, context, emphasis. Cool. So we can see this at the level of a table. But what I'm going to ask you to do for the purposes, actually, I want to make one more point here with this slide. I'm going to ask you for, I'm going to skip this. This is just a slide saying, here's the same data plotted in B versus C. And notice that the interpretations seem completely different. So this is meant to undo the notion that, will the data speak for themselves? When you plot the data, you've already started interpreting it by offering a structure for the reader to take it in. And therefore, you've already started adding something to the data. All right, so what I'm going to ask us to do is to imagine that we write sentences as if they were tables. This is one of Joe's contributions, was to create these boxes. And so what he defined, and I'm going to make some arguments for it, is that in sentences, there are the beginning and the end of the sentence are marked. They're significant. They're locations. They're structures. The thing about structure is fixed. So this is, I'm talking about something that is in the structure of the language, in the structure of the language that you use. You use it all the time. You are not aware that you're using it, but you're going to be really aware of it by the time we're done in an hour, because you'll have bumped into it, these expectations fulfilled and violated enough that you'll know these structures are real. But I'm going to tell you right now, they are real. So that the beginning of the sentence and the end of the sentence are special locations in the sentence. Linguists call them marked. And so I want us to imagine for the rest of the afternoon that we wrote sentences as if they were tables, with the beginning of the sentence on the, I don't know what, this looks like it's right. So the beginning of the sentence, normally when I talk to people, I have to flip it. So the beginning of the sentence is on the left-hand side. I think this is left, looking at this. And the end of the sentence is on the right-hand margin. And somehow magically we can make stuff in between work. And so that we're considering the tabular form of sentences as moving information line by line, because we know how to do that. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to christen the beginning and the end of the sentence, the terms that Joe Williams and company gave them. And by the way, in the handout, there are references at the back, including Joe and Greg's book. So the beginning, topic position. Greg, name the topic position because I'll give you an argument for its existence. The argument comes from linguistics. According to linguists, every language ever spoken by Homo sapiens on this planet, including all the extinct ones that we have managed to translate, every language humans have ever used does something special at the beginning of the sentence. The beginning of this, whatever shows up at the beginning of a sentence has additional resonance or additional instructions, more interpretation around it than just the words themselves. And so that linguists note something called topicality, and that it's at the beginning of whatever it is. By the way, another thing they notice is that every language has sentences, which makes them think that language is somehow, at least that structure of it, is hardwired. And now we get Chomskyan linguistics, and now we're into the genetics of linguistics, but I'm not going to go there. Okay, so this is a piece of hardwired, that every language has something special at the beginning, and it tends to orient things. And so that's what they called it, the topic position. The argument, I'm going to give you an empirical argument for topic and stress, and then we're going to dive into what do they do with sentences. And this comes from the work of cognitive psychology in the last century, particularly the work out of Bell Laboratory. So with the invention of a telephone, the idea of networks and interactions and like all this took off. And it turns out it funded a tremendous amount of great cognitive psychology, because as soon as you had networks, we had people trying to remember networks and remember nodes on the network. And now we need to code. And how much can people remember for code? Well, what do people remember anyhow? And boom, we're off to the races. So there's all this great stuff on memory. And what emerges very quickly is short-term memory and long-term memory. And then they gave people lists of numbers and lists of words and lists of letters and mixed words and numbers, and they put noises around them, and they asked them to remember things. And in the mid-50s, there's a lot of experiments and a lot of chaos. And there's this amazing paper that shows up by George Mitchell called, and you can Google it because it comes up 10,000 times.
Please log in through the Google Home app.
I don't know why it does this hour, but it does, excuse me. It will say that one more time. But you can Google this one, maybe because I said Google and it said, oh yeah. If you Google Miller, magical number 7, you can find, hundreds of copies of this paper because every cognitive psychology course teaches it. So what Miller does is he looks at the data and he says, hey, I see a pattern. And that pattern is, if you give people things to do, particularly things to remember, they're really good at remembering the first items very, very well. And they're really good at remembering the last things they hear or do or experience very, very well. And they're not so good about the stuff in the middle. That's pattern 1. Pattern 2, which is where it got weird, and this is where it's a breakthrough, is that if you give them things to do at the beginning and you give them things you count how many things you give them, once you get to 8, they remember the end, but it's not that the middle is no longer as good. The middle disappears. It's as if they never experienced it. And 8 and up, it's like beginning and nothing. And what he did is he synthesized across a lot of papers and he said, wow, they're all converging around 7. He called it the magical number 7, plus or minus 2. And what his model was, which is still sort of in place, I'm going to modify it slightly, is that short-term memory is a capacitor with 7 slots. We can hold on to 7 things in mind in a moment. And that if you give us 8, the only way we can take in the new thing is by jettisoning something else. And that the early slots and the late slots are prioritized and the stuff in the middle, throw it away. And that, folks, is why for 65 years, telephone numbers in the United States were 7 digits long. Came directly out of this. Okay. So here's the takeaway for it. Where's the hypervariable region in the US telephone number? At the end, right? The end. I can remember reverse time zone. It's at the end, which is totally congruent with the notion of reader energy or memory energy. That if I'm going to give people a 7-digit thing to remember, then the more stable I hold the beginning, the less cognitive energy they need to spend on recalling the beginning, i.e. the exchange. And now I've got all this variability at the end where they can take it in and pay attention to it. That also explains how we went from a 7-digit number to a 10-digit number. Because it's not really 10 digits, right? It's an area code. It's a thing that shows up at the beginning and it's fixed. Notice that the US Post Office never read this paper. They've been trying to move us to a 9-digit zip code where the last 4 digits are even more variable than the last 2 digits of the 5-digit zip code. They've been trying for 40 years. They failed. They will always fail. Humans are not wired to be able to remember 9 digits. Okay, so beginnings and ends matter. The names that we're going to work with them separately. We're going to work with first the topic position, and then we're going to get to the stress position. And I know you guys know all about stress, but the stress I mean here is the stress of emphasis. It's the underscore. It's like, I have something to tell you and I want you to pay attention. That's stress, not the squeeze stress. Okay. I've mapped this to what we just did with the table. So context to emphasis. What's context? Okay, what's context? I'm going to stop the share and start saying hello to you again. Okay, so what we want to think about is we're moving into sentences. What's context in a sentence? Okay, so actually context is finite in a sentence. Like readers bring context to the act of reading, but the context in a document, pretty finite. Sometimes context is explicit contextualizers, usually in the form of prepositional phrases like in the beginning, under these conditions, in our previous publication. Okay, those are contextualizers. At Penn, on Wednesday afternoon. Okay, those are contextualizers. Let's do a thought experiment. I want you to think about beginning to read a new document. We're going to do it in slow motion. Okay. So you've got the title, and you're reading the first sentence, read, topic, verb, stress, period. Okay. You've read the first sentence. You're starting to read the second sentence. Do you notice yourself in reading the second sentence, looking for something to appear or expecting something in the second sentence that you weren't looking for or expecting in the first sentence? You drop it in the chat or come online. You notice you start to look for something. Another way of asking this is, why is the second sentence second? What makes it second? What do we expect is true about the relationship between the first and second sentence? Yeah. So I expect the second sentence to have something in it that refers to the first sentence. And the first sentence, because it's the first sentence, can't refer back to anything. And you can describe it as vague, but the first sentence has to meet the reader in the stratosphere, whereas the second sentence, the reader and the writer share they've already shared a sentence worth of experience. So I'm glad you noticed that. Okay, so what I'm going to name that thing that you start looking for in the second sentence, I'm going to call it old information. And what I mean by old information is it's old in the context of this document, i.e. a reader of this document would recognize it as familiar, as something the reader's heard about before and has experienced before. What does it do? It provides some context. We start looking for old information in the second sentence because we believe that in a well-structured document, the first sentence is first because it gives us information that we need in order to read the second sentence. And that's why it's in order and it's logical. Now, here's a quick revision tip. If you're writing a document and you're having trouble with openers, because openers are really hard, you read the first sentence and you read the second sentence. If there is no old information in the second sentence, try throwing away the first sentence and starting with the second sentence. And I'm do this because I want to make a point here. You may, as a writer, there's a difference between writer strategy and reader strategy. As a writer, you may have needed to write the first sentence in order to write the second sentence. But what you've just discovered is your reader does not need to read the first sentence in order to read the second sentence. And maybe you can just start with the second sentence and be kind to yourself. Like, wow, I had this run off, but I get to take it off. Okay, so that's old information. And old information is a backwards link. And so the argument here is that old information is context. It allows the reader to collapse the previous sentence into a thing that moves into this sentence, and therefore to open up some cognitive capacity, clear up some parts of the capacitors. And by the way, the cognitive psychologists at Princeton tell me it's not 7, it's 4 with some substructure. So we're really limited cognitively. So we need to compress the previous sentence into something so that we can open up some space to take in the current sentence. And I'm calling that old information. And so Joe's argument is that old backwards linking information is going to do more good for readers if it arrives in the sentence early. That what readers expect is that the topic position will be occupied by something familiar that therefore can be alluded to briefly and will allow readers to turn their attention to surviving and processing the rest of the sentence and being rewarded for doing so at the end. Okay? Cool. Let's do a hands-on example then. All right. So can you all turn to the workbook? The handout that I just sent out, I guess it's not a workbook. And we're on page 3. Okay. And let's read a sentence together. So what you're going to see, I actually already did it. So you know how A and B table, A didn't make any sense to us and B was the same words in a new arrangement, but same values in a new arrangement and we could read it. That's true for the A's and B's in the sentences as well. Okay, here's A. The establishment of a new maintenance shift with a new starting time, even if that starting time were to coincide with an established starting time for non-maintenance jobs, such as 12 midnight, would also require a union agreement. Imagine a whole document of sentences that read like that. How are you feeling? Like you really have better things to do than to read this document. Okay, why is this sentence so annoying? What's problematic in it? Anybody want to come on and chat? Tell us. So we want to slow down for a minute. Like what would, then part of what we're doing is like, what would people say about this? You're going to understand very quickly. What's the point? Yeah. It feels burdensome. Right? It's a hard sentence to read. The fact comes at the end of the sentence. Partly the verb comes at the end of the sentence. We've got this enormous subject. What do I do with it? What else require union agreement? Okay, so here's the question for all of you. Hard to read, no connection, cool. So here's the question. Which words in 2A in context, and I know you don't have the context, you don't have the document, we're going to do some inference work here, doing close reading. Which words in 2A are old information, i.e. they appeared in the sentence that preceded this sentence in its original document? Which words in 2A are old information?
Starting time.
I got a vote for the starting time. Okay, establish a new maintenance tip in the starting time. And I've also got somebody put in the chat, union agreement, union agreement, union agreement. Cool. So by the way, I just want to tell you, there's 2 pages of people, there's 50 people on the screen. You are all normal readers. This is yes. So I can tell you, this is exactly the response. Okay, let me work backward. So it can't be both of them. I will tell you, it's only one of those two, union agreement or the new starting time. So those of you who voted for union agreement, why do you think the union agreement is old information? Also, right. What does also say? Unless we have a psychotic writer, also is used by writers to say, I'm repeating myself on a purpose, and I want you to know that I know that you know, and I want you to know that I know I'm doing it. So unless we have a psychotic writer, the previous sentence should have talked about union agreement. Now, before I go any further, all of you who were voting for the establishment of a new mateship with a new starting time, you are wrong for the right reason, which is very rare that one gets that. It's usually the other way around. So I asked you what's old information in the sentence, and you went to where you expected it. And you turned what was there into old information, i.e. you interpreted it that way. I'm flagging this because what you may find, I'm going to send you off to go do this with your own prose when this is done. What you may find is that you tend already to automatically put old information up front, because that's where you think it belongs. But in this case, that's not old information. That's the new information in the sentence. That's the previous sentence talked about union agreement. This sentence talks about things that require union agreement. It extends union agreement into this other list. Could I rewrite the sentence to make that obvious even to us? Yeah, let's take the old information out of the stress position where it is right now and move it up front to the topic position, and we get B. Union agreement would also be required before someone, we don't know who this is, but could establish a new maintenance shift, even if that starting time were to coincide with an established starting time for non-maintenance jobs, such as 12 midnight. Same words? Is there a point? Yeah. We know what to do with these words now. It's the same word, but we shifted the structure and the interpretation is available. And we all are more inclined to go, like, think we know what we were talking about union agreement, and this is a category of things that are required as well. And here's are they enumerated. Now, I'm not going to belabor this one. Notice what happened to the verb between A and B. In A, the verb is require and it's active voice. And in B, it is a passive. How many of you were taught that the passive is weak and immoral and should be avoided if at all possible? Yeah, and then you wandered into engineering and found that the instructions were in science, the passive is preferred, which can give you a moment of writer's block. Like, one of those voices in your head is going to be unhappy with every sentence you write. So what do I say about the passive? That the passive is better than the active in all those situations where the passive does a better job than the active. This is one of them. If the way I can get the old information up front is to use a passive verb and omit agency, I'm not saying who's requiring it. It's the bylaws requiring it. Who cares? If using the passive will allow me to get the old information up front, do it. Do it. There are other reasons to use the passive. I have a TED talk that talks about that. You can go find that. But do it, because from a reader's perspective, I'm not interested in how beautiful your sentences are. I'm interested in how well I transition between them. And putting old information up front is giving me a transition. I've got a sentence. What do I need in the next sentence? Union agreement. Oh, great. I can drop the rest and open up some new space. Cool. All right. So that's a principle. Take a look at sentence number 3A. I'll read it aloud. I'm going to ask you some questions. A single attempt to drive the reaction to completion, i.e. eliminate starting ethyl phenol, by using an excess of Grignard, 1.5 equivalent, continued to give similar results. Anybody recognize this sentence? You've read it before. I promise you. I know you've read it. I know you've read it. You want a clue? You've read it in these materials. I'll even tell you what page it's on. It's on page 3. A couple people are starting to grin. Where have you encountered sentence 3A before in this material? I know it's late in the afternoon, but I'm pushing you. Can you recognize that sentence 3A and sentence 2A are structurally the same sentence, but with different words? A single attempt, similar results, blah, 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 parentheses, in dashes, blah, 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 verb, and then something at the end. Okay. So this is, I do it as a trick question, but if you can see at all that sentence 3A and 3B are the same sentence, then you are starting to see structure. And people have described it like being given in glasses that can see the skeletons of things. And like once you get that vision turned on, it doesn't go away. And you realize how much it's pushing things around. Which words in 3A are old information? Which words refer to the previous sentence? Right? Similar results. Unless we have a psychotic writer, we presume the previous sentence, or maybe the sentence before that at the worst, told us what the results were so that we can compare these results to those results. But look how it's structured. Old information in the stress position at the end of the sentence, where we've given up looking for, because we're just trying to survive all of this single attempt, a little phenol, excess of Grignard, how much? Oh, similar results. Ugh, exhausting. Now, why am I making the point to think about this structurally? If you can see that 3A and 2A are exactly the same sentence, then we're in math. It reduces to the previously solved problem. We solved the previous problem by taking the old information out of the stress position and putting it in the topic position. Do that here. We have to go to a passive verb. Have to go to a passive verb. Too bad. Similar results. I don't know what they were, but if I'd read the previous sentence, I would. Were obtained, in a single attempt, it's only once, to drive the reaction to completion, eliminate starting ethyl phenol by using an excess of Grignard. Well, how much? 1.5. No problem. There's nothing burdensome about all those details because we're prepared for them. Making sense? Cool. And we're going to do one more example, which I'm going to let you do on your own, and then we'll talk about it. I want you to read number 4, and then we're going to turn to talk about the stress position. So would you please read number 4 to yourselves? It's sort of tough going, huh? Ooh, psychotic writer? A little like, what is this sentence about? Yeah. Okay. So it's one of the takeaways from today. These moments where so what I actually want, one thing you can do is that when you hit a roadblock like this, get curious instead of feeling inadequate. There's nothing wrong with you. Okay. There's something wrong with this sentence, but there's nothing wrong with you. So why is it that we are having such trouble with this sentence? And the answer is always going to be because it violates our expectations. So we want to unpack the expectations. So let me talk about expectations here. So I am not a formalist, by which I mean I'm not going to tell you that I know how the mind works. You want to read a linguist who is a formalist, you can go read Steven Pinker. He wrote a book called The Language Instinct, which is brilliant, and another book called Words and Rules, which is also brilliant. But in between, he wrote a book called How the Mind Works. And oh my goodness, if you Google the reviews of that, because it was sort of like, well, yeah, that's how curly-haired genius white guy in privileged America mind works, but maybe we don't want to generalize that everybody's like that. So I won't say that. What I will say, though, is that I can make certain predictions about how people like us with some shared experiences, i.e. we notice things and we're curious and we analyze, and we particularly notice arrangements, how our minds work. So I'll bet you that you've noticed that I have two things in front of me and the screen. Yeah? And I'll bet you if you drop into the inner monologue, you could not help but compare them to each other and notice yellow, pink. Now, did I tell you to do that? No, I just did this. And you just did it. Okay. And I could go to this. Oh, that's a little different. Oh, okay. Well, now I got to get abstract. It's cylinders with liquids in them, and drink and don't drink, and or modern art. I don't know. What is why is she doing? Okay, so this is what we do. We notice arrangement. We've been doing this all afternoon. We notice arrangement. We try to make meaning out of arrangement. And we apply what we understand about the world and we try to interpret. We do that with this sentence and the brain fries. So let's do it slow motion. Starts off churches. Now, reader expectation that I haven't said explicitly, so let me make it explicit. Readers expect, unless they are otherwise notified, that a sentence will begin with the subject of the main clause. This is not a rule. It's just like we know there's going to be a main clause in a sentence and it's going to be subject verb complement. So we go in looking for that. So churches, it's a noun. Maybe it's the subject of the sentence. That would make sense. I want the subject of the main clause. What do you expect next? A verb, right? Churches, what do they do? Next word, exhorting. It's verbish, but it's not a verb. In fact, it's so much not a verb, it's actually called a gerund, that it's going to undo the story of churches. This is not a sentence about churches. This is about churches exhorting. So churches exhorting members to sever family and marital ties. What kinds of churches are these? These sound like weird churches. There's a lot of interpreting just to get through this subject. These must be cult churches taking kids away from their families and taking all their money. Yes. NXIVM. Yes. Okay. That's what this is about. Churches exhorting members to sever family and marital ties. I would like a verb, but I see a comma and I don't get a verb. I get rodent infestation. And the first interpretation is the churches are exhorting their members to be infested with rats. No, not even the churches can be doing that. What is this sentence about? Churches, rats. And notice that it's sounding like a list. And we aren't done yet. It's item 1, item 2. I would really like to get a verb, but I'm not going to get a verb. I'm going to get an and before the last item, and employee discharge. Okay, although in the context of the rats, this sounds like a medical problem. But I got a list of 3. What do I expect next? A verb. So I can find out what they're doing. Like, I don't know what the do-si-do is here, but somehow like the writer's mind has put them all together. So they're going to do something. And instead of getting a verb, we get the cruelest word of all. We get another and. It's like, and what? And a refusal to make a retraction in the newspaper. Oh my goodness, that sounds like pet hygiene. What is this about? I need a verb. The only thing we're confident of at this point is that whatever these four things do, they have nothing to do with one another. Right? Like if you were to finish the sentence, churches exhorting, rodent infestation, employee discharge have nothing to do with one another. I need a verb. Were, God, thank goodness it's a verb, all considered. Oh no, we are really sunk. Because whatever it is, they all do it. And we have no idea what that is. All considered outside the net. What net? Soccer net? Basketball net? Of extreme and outrageous, period. Door slammed shut. Sentence is over. You missed it. Whatever this writer was trying to tell us, didn't get it. Did not transmit. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask the same question that I've been asking for the past 15 minutes. Which words in for must be old information? Which words must have shown up in the previous sentence in context? The net of extreme and outrageous. How do you know? The quotation marks. What do quotation marks signal to a reader? Hi, these words, they didn't start here. They started somewhere else. They have a home somewhere else. And in fact, so yes, that's the old information. What net? It's a legal net. So the previous sentence offered a legal definition of the term extreme and outrageous. That's the previous sentence. What's this sentence doing then? It's giving us examples. Examples of extreme and outrageous. You know, I sometimes do this when I'm on the board, I do Venn diagrams here. We think it's going to be, Venn diagram, like what's in, no, it's giving us examples of things that even though they sound extreme and outrageous to us, do not meet the legal definition. So Venn diagram, here is extreme and outrageous, and it's a set, and a bunch of things could be in it. But those four things, churches, exhorting members, and rodent, they're outside that set. Could I revise that? Sure. Examples considered outside the net of extreme and outrageous were context. What are these things? These are things that don't fit extreme and outrageous. And now I'm not asking them to be related to one another. I'm asking how they relate to extreme and outrageous. Is it making sense? So part of why this example is here, so I want to sit on it for a moment, is that sometimes, we're doing this fast. Just, I know 2 hours seems long, but I pushed for 2 hours. So I said, I know it's Zoom, but 2 hours, we need to. Even when there is both old information and new information in the sentence, readers may not be able to get it in the right order and make sense of it. So do you notice that all three of these examples, 2, 3, and 4, are table C? The new information that the sentences were created to transmit was in the left-hand column, and the linkage between them that organized them, the independent variable, was in the stress position. Cool. All right, so that's the topic position. So that gives us a topic position and old information, and the next page you get just principles on that. So I'm breaking it into parts and filling in the boxes. So we want old and familiar information, the topic position, for 2 reasons. One, they want the information at the beginning of the sentence to provide a connection backwards so that they can, like release carrying the previous discourse into sentence meaning into the sentence, know what's important and know what the transition is, and then let go of the rest of it. And they need to let go of the rest of it, make that backwards link so they can readers can relax, so that there's some energy available to take in something new. Oh, here's the context, stable, familiar, and now something unfamiliar, novel, not yet happened will arrive. And that's in the stress position. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the stress position for 2 minutes here. Really, it should take about 10, but there's more of it in the American Scientist article. What do I mean by a stress position? So it's the end of the sentence. And in this case, I can't go to linguistics because there are two different patterns for sentences, for language structures. Some languages go subject, verb, complement. That's English and French and Spanish and a bunch of languages. And a lot of languages go subject, complement, verb. So they end on the verb. That's German, Russian, Latin, Japanese, Korean, Turkish. There's a lot of them, okay? Everybody does something special at the beginning of the sentence, but people can't do things special with the end of the sentence if the verb is at the end. And if that would mean that a German speaker, if there was a stress position at the end of the sentence, German speakers would only be saying important things in their verbs. And if you've ever talked to a German speaker, you know that the verbs are barely carrying any weight. So no, verbs, so there's a cognitive need to know, what am I supposed to pay attention to? And the argument here is that in English and other languages structured like it, but I'm going to mostly argue for English, the end of the sentence is also significant and marked, and it's a place of automatic emphasis. So where's that emphasis coming from? So one, I can go to Proverbs. Save the best for last. Okay? So we've all heard that. The problem with going to Proverbs is there's always a counter proverb, like first things first, or well begun is half done. That's the topic position talking. So, but there is a proverb, save the best for last. It's a rhetorical commonplace, at least in the Western tradition, starting with the Greeks, that endings matter. That you build up to something and that there's significance in launching them, and launching, and most of this is oratory, is speaking, that you're trying to work the crowd up, says Aristotle, so that then they will go and commit violence in your name. We won't talk about that anymore. Okay, so endings matter. There's something, I think part of it is about the reader energy, that if we take a sort of breath of attention or focus, it's finite, and as we release it, if it's a well-constructed document or well-constructed sentence, well-constructed whatever, there's a little extra energy. We've summoned a little more than we need, and there's a moment of being able to let go of that excess energy before we launch into the next. It's something about our structure moving through time. You see it in folklore and myths. You fight the dragon and win the princess, or take the journey and get the fleece, and we inculcate it into food rituals. I don't know of any culture that begins with a strawberry shortcake and works its way up to the broccoli. It's usually the other way around. Like there's some sense in us, inculcated by culture or wiring, that says, I do the heavy lifting and then I get a prize. I get dessert. I get something new. I get a dopamine flash. Oh, I'm glad I read you. You just told me something. So I want to run with that. What's a stress position? A stress position is a moment for readers of closure. Now, closure is a total Western obsession. Like, Europeans and especially Americans are really obsessed with the notion of endings. And if we had more time, I would wander through a lot of movies to make examples, but I won't. So, I want you to think about how satisfying an ending is, and how often we set ourselves up for an ending and the satisfaction of an ending, even when we know the ending. Try this. Da 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 da. You don't need me to sing that last note. You all know what. Now, for anybody with a sense of musical tone, has already been rendered tone deaf by my singing, but needs me to say da and let this go. Otherwise, you're going to walk around holding your breath all afternoon. Okay, that's closure. From a reader's perspective, where is closure? And the only piece of reliable closure from a reader's perspective is the closure of sentences. And that is why humans invented periods. The first piece of punctuation ever was the period. And this is back when things were, scratched into stone. Writing a mark that isn't a letter is a lot of work, but we need to know that things end. So I'm going to work with a definition of what is a stress position. A stress position is a moment of syntactic closure, subject, verb, complement. The sentence is now over. It's not going to go into another sentence, marked with punctuation to signal that you can stop. So in English, in American English, we call that dot at the end a period. The Brits are so much smarter about this. They call it a full stop. What's a full stop? It means that you can exhale, let the sentence go, take a new breath, and start a new sentence. That's a stress position. Okay, so I want to revise a sentence and do it not from the perspective of old information as much as from the perspective of old information and new information stress position. So you're going to look on page 4 and number 5A, and I just have to warn you, you'll notice this pattern, but the sentences have been getting progressively worse as we've gone through this. Yeah, that's going to continue. Don't worry. It's let's have another really unpleasant sentence. Here we go. 5A. A gross violation of academic responsibility is required to dismiss a tenured faculty member for cause, and an elaborate hearing procedure with a prior statement of specific charges is provided for before a tenured faculty member may be dismissed for cause. I warned you. It's terrible, right? It's horrible. Who wants to read this sentence? Okay. By the way, all of these sentences are real sentences. Somebody wrote them. They're taken from a document. This is actually taken from a faculty handbook, God forbid, not a pen, thank goodness. Okay, so this is a faculty handbook. Why is this sentence so annoying? What would you say about it? And part of why I'm putting you on the spot this way is that I'm asking you to, again, traverse this thing of like, I know I don't like it, and I have no words to name what I don't like about it that are helpful to tell the writer how to do it differently. I can't take it back. It's repetitive, or actually it's what people would call redundant. So let me give you a clue here. Repetition is a cue for emphasis. So something that is repeated we think that something that's worth repeating must be important, right? That bears repeating. Redundant is what we call repetition, where we're going, it was enough that you said that once. Did you really? Why would you repeat that? And so this feels like, why would you repeat that? No punctuation. So it's going on for a while. It belabors us. It's long and convoluted. It feels redundant. It's got a structural problem. Okay, so I'm going to go back to slides so that we can do this together for a moment and think about, let's unpack this. So what we're going to do is we're going to chunk out the sentence into chunks of information. What does it talk about? So, and what I'm doing here is I'm modeling a way of analyzing sentences. And I'll give you a flag right now. Yes, you might be thinking, oh yeah, but this is so slow. Why would I couldn't do this on more than a couple sentences. Your instructions are going to be to do this on some of your sentences this afternoon, because we tend to write the same sentence over and over. So if you analyze 2 sentences and they've done the same thing, you don't need to do this to any more sentences. You can just assume that they're probably doing the same thing and they all need the same repair. Okay, here we go. Or there are a lot of them doing the same thing. So let me get into the slide deck again. Okay, and there, and we'll go. Oh, it didn't like that. So I got to try that again. It doesn't want me to share. The joys of Zoom. I don't know. No. Here we go. Try this again. PowerPoint, share. Now it's sharing, and now I can run the slideshow from the current slide. And you're all over there. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm going to break that sentence into 5 chunks of information. Okay, so the first thing it talks about is a gross violation of academic responsibility. right? So we're talking about this, what an unpleasant topic, right? Is dismissing tenured faculty. And mostly you can't dismiss tenured faculty, but you can for cause. And what's for cause? It's a gross violation. So this is not a parking ticket. This is no misdemeanor. This is hand in the cookie jar or someplace equally inappropriate. So gross violation of academic responsibility, first content that we talk about. The sentence then links that to dismissal. So it brings up dismissing a tenured faculty member. Then it moves to an elaborate hearing. So now we've moved to we're talking about something procedural. So we've got cause and we've got action dismissed and we've got procedure, elaborate hearing, okay, with a prior statement. Stop there. Prior to what? I have to have a statement of charges prior to what? And you see that it's prior to the hearing, but this sentence seems to be violating the procedure because it's giving us the procedure in anti-chronological order, i.e. it's giving us the hearing and then telling us that before there was a hearing, we're supposed to have a statement of charges prior to, and that bothers us. It's not just you are engineers. It's not just engineers grading student papers. We don't like going back in time. This is faculty handbook, and it makes you feel like you violated the procedure in learning about it, which means you can never dismiss anybody. Okay, maybe that's what's this prior statement of charges, and then we get to dismiss, and that's also linked to dismissing a tenured faculty member. Okay, cool. So I want to label each of these items old or new. So we're just analyzing right now. This is very cool. We're just like, here's what does this talk about? Is it old information? Is it new information? So we can see what the structure is. So is it possible that this is the first sentence in this document? See if I can move where I can see you again. You see the joys of two screens that are in an angle. Is it possible for this sentence to be the first sentence to talk about gross violation of academic responsibility? Could this be the first sentence? Might that be new information? It might not be, but it could be new, right? At some point, somebody has to talk about gross violation of academic responsibility, and it might be here. So temporarily, I'm going to label that as new. Okay, we're going to come back and visit it too in a moment. Right there, I need my buttons. No. Let's do that. All right. New. Okay, next chunk. Dismissing a tenured faculty member. New or old? It's got to be old, right? There's no way that this is the first sentence in this document to talk about dismissal and tenure, right? That's impossible. We had to define tenure as the right to, the privilege of not being dismissed. All right, so this has got to be old, and you can see, oh, we know this pattern. This is table C. Oh, if gross violation is new and this is old, I already know what's going on. But we're not done yet. So elaborate hearing, new or old? Well, if we've just heard about the gross violation, then we're not prepared to hear about we haven't heard about the procedure before. So that's got to be new, right? And a prior statement of charges, also new. So I'm going to give both of them a label. And now we get to item 5, dismissing a tenured faculty member, old or new? Old, you say. Okay. Yeah, except. So I don't think that dismissing a tenured faculty member is old information now. It was old information when it showed up in position 2 in this sentence. I think it's moldy old information. It's smelly cheese. It's rancid socks. Oh my goodness. It's not only old in the discourse, like in the passage or in the document, it's old in this sentence. It's repeating itself. So look at the structure, okay? We've got new before old, and here's where it gets interesting. We've got old information in the stress position, where we can really appreciate the impact of the stress position. Why is it so annoying to have it repeated in the stress position? Because old information in the stress position is doubly unhelpful. has two problems. One, old information has a job to do for readers, and that is to make a backwards link. Nobody is trying to make backwards links in the stress position. They're just trying to survive the sentence and get through it. Second, the stress position has a job, and that job is to grant emphasis, to go on information, to wham it, say, ha ha, here, reader, this is what you're supposed to pay attention to in the stress position. And it can't if what's in the stress position is so obviously not what we're supposed to emphasize. So remember, I gave you a definition at the beginning of bad scientific writing as writing that requires a disproportionate amount of energy to figure out how it's put together. That's bad, but it's not the worst kind of energy, the worst kind of sentence. The worst kind of sentence is this one, where you get to the end of the sentence and you look at this and you say, I see what I could emphasize, but clearly I shouldn't emphasize that. So now I'm going to go emphasize what I think is important, whether it's what the writer thinks is important or not. And if I ask every reader, what do you think this sentence means? Each of you will tell me what you think it means, and you will be right because you will have interpreted it by making a sign of what you think is important, but we don't know what the writer meant to be important. So let's revise. Let us revise here. Okay. And I'm going to revise by put this over here. Oh, I hate to get rid of this. I'm going to do it. I'll just do it from memory. So I'm going to say that for this document, this moment, gross violation of academic responsibility is indeed new, and the text dismissal is old. So let's get old before new. In order to dismiss a tenured faculty member, a university must prove, here's a stress position, I'm going to put new information in the stress position, a gross violation of academic responsibility. How's that sentence sound? In order to dismiss, this is B, in order to dismiss a tenured faculty member for cause, the university must prove a gross violation of academic responsibility. If this is the first time those words, gross violation, have shown up in this document, is this sentence sufficient? Is it done? Part of what I'm asking is, is this enough of a thought for a sentence? Yeah, right? It's like, I give you gross violation, and you say, got it, gross violation. Okay, got it, right. In which case, what do we do with these other two pieces of new information? The procedural stuff. Where do they go? Shove them into this sentence? Well, no, they're new and important too. What do we do? Put them in another sentence. Okay, I'm going to give you the most useful definition there is. I'm going to tell you how to know when a sentence is too long. It's not a matter of how many words. Microsoft Word with this little green squiggle, it is not doing it. Okay, when is a sentence too long? When it has more candidates for emphasis than it has stress positions to signal emphasis. So if this sentence as written in A is 3 pieces of new information and 1 stress position, it's horrible, A, because the stress position has old information, but in revising it, we got to decide what deserves emphasis. And if more than one thing deserves emphasis, then we need more than 1 stress position. So what we're going to do for this talk, because I'm not going to keep you all afternoon, is first approximation, every sentence has a stress position. That's what the full stop does. There are a couple other ways to make additional stress positions. Semicolons make additional stress positions. That's why the Brits call them semi-stops. And colons make stress positions as well, but that's a side issue and we can talk about it. But what am I going to do with these other 2 things? I'm going to put them in another sentence. So that when it's a sentence too long or too short, it's not a question of how many words. It's a question of the ratio between structure and substance. It's too short when it doesn't have anything worth emphasizing, and it's too long when it has too much deserving emphasis relative to positions to emphasize. So if this is the first time we're hearing gross violation, then I need to create 2 sentences here. Now, some of you were sort of hinting at this. Let me give you another alternative, which is, let's say that this was not the first time we've heard about gross violation. So we've got this document, we were in a chapter called Tenure and Dismissal. So we've been talking about that for about 20 pages. And 2 pages ago, we entered into, you can only do it for a gross violation, stress position. And then can you hear that once you have a gross violation there, what I would like to know is, well, how gross is gross? And what do you mean by violation? And could you define what that term means? But I'm not ready to hear about the procedure. I want to hear about, tell me more about gross violation. Okay, so if I tell me more about gross violation, we did for 2 pages. What does this sentence want us to do? It wants us to take all of that discussion and now turn us towards the procedure. So in fact, this is the structure. It's a little better, old and old, but it's still got all this new stuff sandwiched in the middle. And then it ends up with old stuff in the stress position that's still annoying. So what can we do with this sentence? What I'm asking here is, so I just said that a stress position, there's a link between stress positions and information deserving of emphasis. Here we have 2 things in the sentence, both of them are new. So the first question is, do they both deserve emphasis? To which I would say, yes, if this is where we're turning to the procedure, and you got to follow both these, you got to do both of these things. You got to charge them, and then you got to have a hearing. They both deserve a stress position. Can I get more than one thing in a stress position? Yes, provided the reader recognizes that there's more than one thing here. So this is where it gets a little complicated, and this is where we're going to end. How does a reader know that they're in the stress position? The stress position begins at the moment when a reader is reasonably confident that there's nothing else going to happen in the sentence except it's going to end. So some sentences, it's one word, right? They surprise you. Whoop, oh, that sentence is over. And some sentences announce themselves halfway through. Okay, all we have to do is this, and then it does it. It might take 2 lines. And so one way of doing that, and the one that I'm going to use here, is to say, hey, I got steps in a procedure. I'm going to put them in an order, and I'm going to number them. Because it's going to be I'm going to give a stress position to the procedure, and the procedure has steps, and I'm going to take it away and take it home. Okay. So you get that in 3, in C there. Even when there is a gross violation of academic responsibility, old information upfront, a university may dismiss a tenured faculty member for cause, more old information connecting the local discussion of gross violation to the big discussion of the chapter, only if it won. And you see, as soon as you see that one, what do you know you're going to see? At least a 2. How are you going to know before you get to the last item in this list that you are getting to the last item in this list? There'll be an and. So we can get like, oh, this sentence is going to end when it gets through this list. Then only after it, 1, specifically charges the faculty member, now we're in chronological order, and, oh, it's a 2-part list, 2, provides an elaborate hearing, period. Big stress position. Okay. Cool. It's actually a very good moment. How could we make C a terrible sentence? Really easily. Replace the period with a comma and keep right on going. Because about the worst thing you can do to your reader or your audience, your interlocutors, is to promise them closure and then at the last minute say, no, I'm going to give you some more stuff too, and keep going from there. So I'm watching the clock. We are coming up on the last 2 minutes. Okay. So these are my 2, you've got the nitty gritty of it. The other examples are playing with this further, and I've actually put the slide deck into the drive. So what I'm offering you here is homework. I'm going to give you the door prize and the booby prize. The booby prize is you are going to notice the inversion of old and new information all over the place for the next few weeks, and you'll want to hit people. What the next example we would do would be one where I would stop and say, do you feel like you want to shake the writer and say, don't God, can't you see you keep doing this? Okay, so you're going to have that reaction where you're going to want to go, don't God, can't you keep suit? All right, and that will pass, and you'll be okay in a couple of weeks, and you'll go back to forgiving the imperfections of the world. What I want you to do is to go home and look at something you've written. Turn off the substance reading machinery. I don't care what you're writing about. I don't care whether it's a letter to your mother, or it's a report, it's your lab notebook, or it's a review article, or it's your last homework assignment. I don't care what it is. Turn off the substance reading machinery. And I want you to just analyze a passage for old and new information. And the question you're asking about yourself is, where do I put old information? Where do I put new information? You want a corollary of that? What do I put in the topic position? What do I put in the stress position? So you can get it either way. That's why the boxes, you can go from the boxes down or the information up. And I want you to notice, just notice what you do. In a longer session, what we do discover is that we're creatures of habit. And so that people who tend to give us table C, new before old, in a couple of sentences, do that a lot. Moreover, table C, so it's a great pen moment to end. What I noticed when I was working in the chemical engineering project lab is I told you all the professors like, oh, you're putting the dependent before the new independent, but I knew why they were putting the dependent before the independent. Because when you are the experimenter, the writer, the person composing the table, which variable are you focused on? The news. What's your problem as a writer? To get the new stuff down before I forget it, fail to think it, lose it, forget to record it, whatever. So the writer's anxiety is, let me give you all the stuff that's worrying me. It's new. Oh, okay, let me tell you why I wanted to tell you that. And that's this pattern. And that's this pattern. And that's why it's everywhere. But your experience for the past hour is, if you recognize the pattern and flip it, I've been watching your face. Can you feel the relief when you put the words in a new order, and you can feel like, oh, got it. That's what you're trying to say. That's not so hard. I can do that. Okay. So you want to develop the habit of giving readers information in the locations where they can process it. So the last pitch here is, the way to learn this stuff is as a revision strategy. If the next time you go to try to write is you try to think, okay, old information, new information, and the equivalent of intellectual constipation will set in, and nothing will come out, and you won't compose anything. So I want you to notice the pattern, whatever it is that you currently do, and learn to revise it. Much better than fighting with yourself. We're all the way back to the affective part. If you decide that you're going to change the way you think, new thoughts, you will be fighting against your nature. I still write my first draft sentences new before old. What happens with me is that I write new, and I start to go on, and I recognize that I've done it. And then I back up and put the old in front of it. So it's not that I have not managed to think old before new. I have just managed to catch myself thinking new before old before I give it to the reader. So go home. So this is a taste. There's more material, but so you get a sense of, like, if we slow, there's no reason you should know this. This is not, nobody's ever talked about this. We do know it, which is how we surface it and eventually make it work in the stochastic method. But it's so much more efficient if you can catch the pattern, deal with the pattern, and practice it everywhere. because this is how we interact. And it makes writing into an act of empathy, which, to be honest, I said this to a bunch of physicists once, and they said, that's the problem then with our communication. So I'm so glad they said it and not me, but writing is an act of empathy. So the other project, one project I give you for graduate school is to become a scientific reader. The other project in graduate school is to understand the minds of other scientific readers. That's a research project. It's ongoing around you. It happened in this room. It happens everywhere you go. That's the bigger project. If you understand how your field thinks and you try to reach it, you will do the quality work that you're here to learn to do, and that we are fully confident you can do and will do. And this is where science will go. So I switched into scientific writing because it looked like an orthogonal way of doing science that nobody was talking about. Woohoo! Great, I have an opportunity. There's my research plan. But yeah, I mean, you got great mentors to do the technical stuff at the bench or on the computer. This is this other curriculum, and they know how to do it. But you've got some vocabulary so that you can talk with your mentors better about it and learn from them more efficiently. All right. I did keep you 5 minutes. We're done. All right. Thank you so much. I'm happy to stay on for questions. I think you probably have other things you're supposed to be at, though, or maybe I should get out of the way and just, and Annie will tell me what to do. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Dr. Swan. This was amazing. And I feel like the time went by really fast. And
yeah, that's why I say you can do this for 2 hours.
And a lot of us would be happy to spend, 3 days with you. So for the people in the CEMB that are staying for the retreat, I think I can give us until like 3:53 for a break, and then we can come back. But you're welcome to stay on, and anybody's welcome to stay on to ask questions until then. But thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for the comments in the chat. Yeah, it's this, I mean, there is this amazing thing with Zoom. You can talk to people over time and space and feel a real connection. It's just, who knew? The gifts of the pandemic, because I don't want to lose that. It would be so much more fun to be in person with you, but look what we did.
Hi, Professor Swan.
Yeah.
I'm a PhD student right now, and I thank you for your really, innovative explanation of, like how to analyze the paper. I think it will really help to, revise my papers and so on. I want to know, like, as a student right now, what methods can I use to kind of like help me, increase my writing skill or something.
Okay, yeah. So that's a great question. Thank you. So 2 things. One is there is a reference list at the end of the handout. So, and I can, there's an article that I wrote that will actually, it's called The Science of Scientific Writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can even drop that in the chat, and then Annie will have it as well. That's an article that I wrote when I first moved into the field. It's essentially my postdoc work, was writing that. So that talks about what we're doing here. So part of it is that you need to practice revision. So in my program at Princeton, particularly for students for whom English is an acquired language, which is sounding like it might be, because we have a large international population. One of the things is you want to opportunities to write informally to get those neural synapses going. So one of the challenge for everybody when they have to go and write a paper is they sort of freeze, like, it's a formal thing, and it's like, it would be like, it's like, how am I going to perform, this concerto? And the instructions in graduate school are, you'll just go on the stage and play the concerto. It's like, no, you won't. You need to practice something on beforehand in order to do that. So one suggestion, and this is what it got framed early, is review articles, writing summaries, critical, short reviews of articles you read. So in my program, we have a 6-week course for international students arriving in a US institution. And the core assignment there is first to write a 1-page critical summary. And it's critical. It's like, what's the field? What is this paper doing that's new? Do I believe it? What else do I need to do with it? And doing that it's almost like writing the reviewer's abstract, which if you've ever seen a manuscript review, that's in fact what reviewers do. They have to summarize at the beginning what they think the authors think the paper means. And then they go and say, well, I don't believe it, or I do believe it, or here's why you should publish it, or whatever. And I say to students, look, you're reading stuff already. If you do one article a week like that for yourself, the first week, it takes 3 hours to do it. And you wonder, oh my God, this is hard, because it's analysis. Summarizing that way is really hard. But if you do that every week, at the end of a year, you have written 50 to 100 pages of critical analysis in the vocabulary of your field. Whereas the native US educated student who's just been working hard in the lab and hasn't done that next to you hasn't written anything in a year and a half.
Yeah.
Exactly. I say this to the US students too, and they say, oh, you're right, I should be doing that. but yeah, so that's an opportunity. So, and you might find somebody else in your lab group where instead, like if you have journal club or something like that, that somebody writes a summary of it. So that not only are you reading, but you're writing as you read and assembling how you're going to use it. So that when you have to go and write a paper, so what happens in the course is that everybody learns, they do this critical summary, and then they start to weave it together to write a short literature review, like 5 pages. And I say, make that a living document. When you read more stuff, go revise it. It's going to expand into a chapter in your thesis. But it's also going to be a living document that you can draw from to write an introduction.
I don't know how to revise the paper.
Yeah, so that's what we just learned, a revision strategy. So okay. So that's where I'm good. So what's in the handout is more about revision, learning about readers, revising for sentences, finding readers who will work with you on revision, who can say and who can say, I don't understand you, but or I don't know what you're doing because this is how I'm interpreting it. And so you get better at that part of it. And then but you practice it in a less formal setting.
I think Penn Writing Center should be a good resource.
And Penn Writing Center will help, right? So the other plug I didn't make is a writing center. So the whole model here is writing center model. I mean, that's how my postdocs work. It's like they take the course and then they teach it the very next semester. And they're like, I said, you know enough to have a conversation with somebody who's not as experienced, and then both of you will figure it out together, and the writer will revise and you'll know how to teach it. So take it to the writing center.
Thank you. Yeah.
And take the article, but revising for old and new information, start there. Okay.
Thank you. Great.
All right, I think we're about at time for this, but yeah, thank you again so much.
Thank you. That was fun. Thank you for the invitation. This was a great afternoon. I've enjoyed it. Good luck, everybody.